The very unique thing that not a lot of people talk about within the self-storage industry is that it's not like an iPhone, right? Like iPhone, they can go out and go, hey, the iPhone 20 is coming out. And all of a sudden you've got lines of people lined up at stores waiting to go get this brand new iPhone. But the thing in self-storage is you can't create demand. Today in the self-storage report, we're going to be talking about if you should be bullish or bearish right now on self-storage. Look at some of the headwinds in the industry. Plus, we're going to talk about something really, really unique about self-storage that doesn't get talked about enough, but also has never been measured before until today. I'm going to show you how we're now measuring that here in the industry. Welcome to the Self-Storage Report. I'm Chris Berg, Head of Business Development for Abernathy Development. If you've got some land out there in California, Arizona that you think might work for self-storage, definitely hit me up. Let me know. We'll take a look at it. Also, please be sure and subscribe to the channel so you can be the first to know as we're putting out this great content. I want to start with a really simple story today as we dive into some of the data and then this really unique aspect of self-storage. And it's about Sam Zell. If you don't know Sam Zell, he passed away just recently, but an incredible real estate investor, business investor. And he shares this great story. He talks about the first day he walked into his intro to econ class at the University of Michigan. And on the board in big bold letters, it said supply and demand. And he's like, that really stuck with me because it was sort of a basic premise, a basic principle that he would use as he was looking at buying or investing in a piece of real estate or buying or investing in a business. And so, as you know, in this industry within self-storage, everybody's talking about supply. Very few people talk about demand. And up until today, we've never had really a formulaic way to measure demand. And so if you can't measure demand, you're probably going to see, let's just say, some poor choices when it comes to making investments in self-storage assets. And that's exactly what's happening right now. I was recently on a great webinar, thanks to Argus and Ben Vestal. I'm going to play for a clip or a couple clips from that here in just a few moments. But I mean, they were just saying, guys, it's shocking that people are still going out there building in certain areas where there's just so much supply and just not enough people for demand. And I think that's one of the things that you got to start to ask yourself in this industry is, so like, what is demand? How do you measure? How do you determine demand? If it's so important to someone like Sam Zell, it should be important to us. But the question is how do you measure that? Measuring supply, super simple in this business. Measuring demand up until today has been sort of a different idea, if you will, not very formulaic. And so we want to give you that metric later on today. But the thing is that demand in this industry is really people. But the very unique thing that not a lot of people talk about within the self-storage industry is that it's not like an iPhone, right? Like iPhone, they can go out and go, hey, the iPhone 20 is coming out. And all of a sudden you've got lines of people lined up at stores waiting to go get this brand new iPhone that, I don't know, maybe added a couple pixels on the camera or something. But the thing in self-storage is you can't create demand. And so please don't take my word on this. I want to play for you a couple clips today. This is from Brett Henry from Trojan Storage, incredibly successful in this industry. Right now, he's got a $1 billion portfolio of storage assets. He was on the pod recently, the Self-Storage Report, and I want to share with you a clip from Mr. Henry and what he talked about here when it comes to demand in self-storage.
When you build a storage or you develop a storage, you do not create demand. You service existing demand in a market. So if there's 1,000 people that want to rent and there's 10 buildings, everyone can get 100.
That is the key element right there. In this industry, you cannot create demand. I also wanted just to reiterate this. Just this week, again, Ben Vestal from Argus Storage, they had a phenomenal webinar. One of the guests on the webinar was Liz Schlesinger. She runs Merit Capital, owns hundreds of self-storage assets, has built an incredible business. And again, here's what somebody who's been in the business for a long time, built a very successful business. Here's what Liz Schlesinger had to say.
I think your point about people, growth is the only thing that creates demand. Also, we can't really create demand as an industry, right? Like people either need or don't need storage.
So there you have it. You cannot create demand in this industry. And yet many people are putting assets in places that have got no business being developed there. And that's a conversation for another day. We'll talk about incentives for developers. And even within this webinar, some people suggested that, hey, you might see developers right now that are really just solving for their development fee and not so much concerned about the performance of that asset. That is a very, very bad incentive, and it's obviously starting to bear true and show some of those results within the industry. So I want to share with you today just some headwinds really to be aware of in this industry if you're going out and thinking about either buying assets and or developing assets. So again, you can begin to think about demand from a new perspective. And in a little bit here, we'll give you actually a tool on how you can measure demand. So again, this is from Ben Vestal from the webinar they had this week. And he kind of sets the stage here because I saw an article earlier this week in the Wall Street Journal about a really just stunning, shocking stat that I'll share with you in a moment here after you hear this clip from Ben Vestal from earlier this week. And again, this is all in the context of what creates demand, supply and demand. How do we really have a good way of measuring demand to ensure that if we're going to go put 20, 30, $40 million in the ground, there's an actual need and demand for that product?
Yeah, I think Liz said it best. At the end of the day, some of these markets will not recover. With population growth being the major driver of self-storage demand, we've got all-time low birth rates, all-time low immigration rates. We have a lot of things that are working against us. So if you're thinking about developing a project, please be vigilant about it.
Very well said. And you heard there, population growth is the key driver when it comes to demand and self-storage. And so it was earlier this week, I was on the Wall Street Journal and saw this article here where it says Americans are leaving the U.S. in record numbers. And there's just some really shocking data in this piece where it talks about, I think it's like for the first time since 1935. And here we have been this nation known for immigration. You often hear people talk about, hey, what makes America great is that we've had all these immigrants come into the country. Well, now we're becoming a country of emigration where you've got more people actually leaving than are coming in, which for many of us sounds absolutely shocking. That article from the Wall Street Journal started putting me down sort of a research rabbit hole. And so I started doing some research on different aspects of what's going on with population and what's happening within the United States, because demand in self-storage has been so stagnant as of late. Big part of that you could say is simply because you've got a bunch of people locked into 3% mortgages. I get that. That's absolutely true. That is part of it. And there's also a demographic piece. I think many of us out there have heard, the saying demographics is destiny. And so I want to share with you some data that came out of my research rabbit hole, if you will, based on that Wall Street Journal article about where things right now and what's happening as far as people in the United States. So again, you can see here, first time since 1935, more people left the United States and entered it. By the way, this research all done by Deep Research and Claude. So if you haven't used that yet, I think it's very, very robust. It built out this entire thing. But here's a piece that I've been talking about now for, I think I was at the New York SSA and brought this up. And I don't think it gets enough attention. That's just my personal opinion, but I want to share it with you and you can kind of chew on it and see if you think how much of a potential headwind this is for our industry. And so here it is. You can see at net international migration United States. And we all know from 2020 to 2024, 2025, I mean, we had a record number of people coming to our border. This is border apprehension. So this is just the people that we know are coming across the border, let alone the ones that we don't. I don't want to get into politics. I'm just talking sheer, pure numbers because, again, as Ben Vestal said, population is demand, or population growth is demand for self-storage. And so clearly these numbers are growing. I mean, this is really, really good news if you're in a border state, i.e. Southern California, Arizona, Texas, even Florida. But then look at what's happened. I mean, since the peak in 2024, now in the year of 2026, this is a projection, you're talking an 88%. 88% drop from people that are being apprehended at the border. That is a stunning amount of people. I mean, you look at here, this is basically, if you add this up, it's roughly 6 million people or so just over these 3 years that are coming into our country. 6 million people. That's a big, big city. And the more people that are coming in, obviously the more demand there's going to be, or hypothetically there's going to be for self-storage. When it drops off this precipitously, how's that for a good SAT word? This dramatically, I think that has an impact. And you can see here, Border Patrol apprehensions hit their lowest level since 1970 here in 2026, based on what they project is going to happen in 2026. So just would love your thoughts and feedback on how much do you think that kind of figure, that kind of number is making a dent in our industry. You may agree with that. You may not. Also, demography is destiny. As I said a moment ago, I think this is another one, and Ben Vestal just alluded to this as well. U.S. total fertility rates, this replacement line here, this is basically what we need to have from a birth rate perspective just to replace our current population. But you can see here that has been dropping since 2007. Now, I lead a men's group every Wednesday night, and we had it last night. The person in the group had no idea that I was obviously going to be talking about this today, but a gentleman brought up an amazing data point. Now, is this causation? I don't know, but there's definitely correlation. And he goes, hey, does anybody here know when the fertility rate or the replacement rate really started to dip? And obviously I knew this data point. I didn't know where he was going, but I was like, oh, it's 2007. It started to decline in 2007. Do you know what was released in 2007? The iPhone. The iPhone came out in 2007. Now, is that causation? I don't know. Is there a correlation? Obviously, yes. So that's a whole nother deep research rabbit hole we can go down another day. But I just thought that uh, the correlation is absolutely fascinating. So I want to go back to this migration bit for a moment, because as I was obviously doing some research for the self-storage report, I found an interesting piece in Bloomberg News just talking about the impact that immigration policy can have on different areas. Again, I don't want to get political. I just want to talk data. And what I really want you to think about here is supply and demand, as we've been talking about. And when you've obviously lowered demand and you've had a bump up in supply, that is going to typically drive down prices. And so this was a really, I think, interesting bit that what's happening in the out parts of, this is Frisco, Texas, just north of Dallas. And so as we probably know, if you'll follow real estate, there's been tremendous, tremendous growth within Dallas, within Austin, within Houston. A lot of these areas in Texas have been growing, again, very precipitously, very dramatically. But now things are shifting. And so here's a clip from this piece from Bloomberg News.
The South Asian community has been impacted by Trump's ever-changing policies on H-1B visas. There are a lot of layoffs right now. And if you're on an H-1B visa, you have basically 60 days to find another company to sponsor you. Otherwise, you have to leave or potentially face deportation. In February 2026, home prices in the heart of that growth corridor north of Dallas were down 9% in a year. That's huge when you compare that with the metro as a whole, where prices were down just 4%.
9% home prices go down in a year. I mean, that is a stunning stat, no matter where you live, that home prices go down 9%, especially when you look at other areas of the country where they're absolutely just fine. So he is suggesting that, hey, again, the causation part is that we are having a lot less immigration into the nation. Thus, there's now less demand in those areas. Now prices are coming down. So that's the demand piece. And so I would love to get your perspective, your point of view on how much is this impacting demand right now within our industry. And again, you can go back and say, hey, Chris, these are 6 million people here. You've got some of this going on there. Yeah, the replacement rate's down. But the bottom line is that we simply don't have demand because people aren't moving. They're stuck in their 3% rate. That's absolutely true. But I think also you could point at some of these just demographic standpoints that are decreasing, diminishing. They're not helping is my point. So could you say it's all about the mortgage rates? You could, but you also just want to look at bare numbers. Those don't bode well as either. And so that's the demand aspect. I'm going to share with you a really critical tool here in a moment about how you can start to measure demand. Because I think one of the things, if you're going to go again, put 10, 20, $30 million into the ground as a developer in self-storage, in my opinion, and this is what Warren Buffett always said, he always said, hey, the 3 most important words in investing are margin of safety. So whatever you can do to give yourself a margin of safety is obviously going to have a big impact in your ability to make some mistakes and yet still get really good returns for your investors. Before we do, I just want to jump into the supply piece, because the supply piece is really, really easy to measure. Everybody talks about supply within the self-storage industry. And you can see here, there's just been a ton of supply that's come on. I mean, these are really staggering numbers all the way back up to 2019. You had COVID happen, things went down a little bit. But as we all know, when COVID happened, everybody started moving, right? Thus, you had a huge kick up in rates. I mean, stocks going up for public and extra space. And now you've got a bunch of people in private capital going, hey, you know what? These guys are making a ton of money. I'm going to go jump in that bandwagon. But as we all know, if you're a developer, it takes a long time to actually get these things out of the ground and to get leased up, which is a whole nother conversation. So then all of a sudden you've got record supply coming back on. People finally realize like there was just way too much supply in these markets, and now it's dropped off. Man, this is like the third time that I get to use the word precipitously, dropped off precipitously. But to give you an example, again, in the webinar that Ben Vestal did, Liz Schlesinger talked about, they were looking at some assets in New Hampshire. I think she mentioned it was a town of like 5,000 people, and somebody actually is building and or built 100,000 square foot self-storage asset in a town of like it makes zero sense. I don't even know how they've got a bank to finance it. Maybe they did it all cash. The point is that just makes no sense unless you're simply solving for the developer fee and that's it, because that asset is not going to perform well. So the big question is, okay, Chris, I know that I can go into cities or I can look at a thing like Radius or Tract IQ or these different, software tools that are out there to begin to really understand and appreciate how much supply is in a particular marketplace. And even that sometimes isn't very, very well publicized. But up until today, there's really never been a formulaic way to measure demand. And just, again, put yourself in a Sam Zell type of mentality. We know that the basic thesis of business is supply and demand. And you've got people out there putting 10, 20, $30 million into the ground with real no way to measure demand. Yeah, you can say, hey, my buy box is going to be, a minimum of 250,000 people in a 3-mile radius. And that's great because, again, it gives you that margin of safety. But as I was looking at this, I was looking for one other metric to help me really appreciate and understand how to measure demand. And so when I was at the New York SSA, great gentleman, Mr. Cohn, who's been in the business for 38 years, based out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He was in front of the room and said, look, here's what I do to give myself a margin of safety. Because if I'm going to go build, I've got to ensure that I've got a 3x demand quotient or 3 times the demand in that marketplace before I even think about putting a shovel in the ground. Because the thing for me is that I don't know who else is going to come and build in that area. So it may look good today, but all of a sudden other people are going to see that it's good. They're going to be putting shovels in the ground. And now I've got a bunch more supply coming online that I can't stop, that I can't really defend against. So I've got to have this margin of safety to ensure that my asset's going to perform the way that I want it to perform. Now, the good news for you is that this is a really, really simple formula. Is this the holy grail for you as far as, investing money and putting money into the ground? No, but it's just another metric to help you, again, give you a greater margin of safety as you're making decisions. Now, how do we come up with this formula? What's awesome about this is we got it from the Self-Storage Association demand study. Like it's literally a formula from the self-storage demand study. And then we added one more factor in, thanks to the gentleman out of Pittsburgh talking about that 3x demand. So I want to just walk through this with you real quickly, and then I'll give you a simple example to show you how it works. So according to the SSA, Self-Storage Association demand study, the way that they begin to measure demand is they take households times now this usage rate. So this is the percentage of households that are using self-storage across the country. It's 12.6%. It's higher in some parts of the country, lower in others. So again, this is not a perfect metric. It just starts to give you some numbers to look at to give yourself a greater margin of safety as you're going to go buy an asset or develop them. So you take households times 12.6% times, again, the average household is going to use 125 square feet of storage across the country. So we take that total demand. Then what we're going to do is we're going to look at total supply in that marketplace. We're going to take total demand minus total supply. So that's the unmet demand. But now for me to have a margin of safety, I'm going to divide this by my proposed net rentable square feet. And I want that to be a 3x in order to build there. So I'm going to use a couple of examples just to show you how this works. I'll grab a site out of our CRM to give you an idea, but it's really, really simple. All you've got to do is go to storagedemandscore.com and you put in an address of where you're looking to buy and or build. Let's say that we're going to build an asset that's net rentable square feet of 75,000. Thank you to Tract IQ for powering this great storagedemandscore.com. I click on this blue button. Hopefully I've got enough API calls to have this thing work. But as you're going to see in a moment, the reason I'm showing you Pasadena, wow, look at that, is because right now there's a moratorium in Pasadena. So none of us can build there anyways, which is exactly why you've got this incredible demand score. And so if you want to see, again, how did they come up with 3.8? If you could build in Pasadena, this is telling you absolutely there is enough demand there to give you a strong margin of safety to go out and build in Pasadena. Again, how do we do that? We take the total number of households, which thanks to Tract IQ we can get, which is 74,000 times 0.126 times 125. This comes up with our total demand. This is the supply in the marketplace. You can see there's nothing in the pipeline because there's a moratorium. Then you take the total demand minus the effective supply. It gives you 281,000 square feet. Divide that by what we're going to build, and you end up with 3.76. So again, I've got this 3+ margin of safety where now if 3 more people came in and said, hey, I'm going to go build 75,000 net rentable square feet, I've got this margin of safety to protect my asset to ensure that I'm going to get good returns for my investors. So again, very simple. Go to storagedemandscore.com. You put in an address, put in the net rentable square feet, hit this blue button, thanks to Tract IQ, and it will actually give you a 3-mile and 5-mile demand score. And you can see exactly how it calculates that. So very, very simple. But here's why I wanted to build this tool for this industry, is because I really just want to encourage and help people that if you're going to go put, again, 10, 20, $30 million in the ground, you want to have as much, I think, data, as many metrics as you can to increase the probability for success for that asset. Again, you never know what's going to happen 3 or 5 years from now, but this is at least a way to increase your margin of safety. So I know we've had a lot of headwinds that we've talked about today in the industry. Well, I think you're hearing a lot of people that are very, very bearish on the industry today. But what's the long-term thesis look like? Now, let's assume that things change as far as immigration, because obviously administrations change. Here's an actual tailwind for the industry. If you look at single-family homes right now, apartments, right? The home builders are building smaller homes. If you're building smaller homes, there's a higher probability that you're obviously going to need more storage. And so that's one of the other positive aspects right now that's happening within the industry. A couple things is this is actually the 2026 mid-year self-storage industry outlook from Public Storage. And you can see here that the utilization rate of storage, I mean, it's nearly doubled in the last 20 years. There's also a big conversation about small businesses. You've got a lot more small businesses utilizing storage. So the utilization rate is absolutely going up, which obviously bodes well long-term for the self-storage industry. So again, just want to remind you, go to storagedemandscore.com, put in an address, put in what you want to build or what you're buying. That will give you a demand score to give you an idea of, hey, what's my margin of safety within this asset, within this community. So love to know your point of view there. What do you think about some of the demographics we talked about, your thoughts on demand? I'd love to get you, obviously, your feedback on storagedemandscore.com. And are you bullish or bearish on our industry? I'm Chris Berg. This is the Self-Storage Report. Again, if you've got some land out there you think is going to work for storage in California, Arizona, please hit me up. Let me know. Be happy to underwrite that for you. And obviously, take a look at what the storage demand score is for you as well. And of course, subscribe to the channel here so you can be the first to get this outstanding content that we're putting out here on the Self-Storage Report, helping you build generational wealth in real estate.